Budget 2017 has now been delivered by Treasurer Morrison with a focus on fairness, opportunity and security. That is, the government is aiming to return the budget to surplus by the end of the forecast horizon, albeit while continuing to invest in the economy to improve its productivity and efficiency over the coming years. Beginning with the headline figures, the government now forecasts the deficit will improve from its current $38 billion as of the 2016-17 financial year to a deficit of just 2.5% by 2019-20. A surplus of around $7 billion is then expected come 2021, which is at the end of the forecast horizon. Achieving this improvement in the deficit requires continued robust growth in tax receipts, albeit while maintaining a very modest growth rate in the level of expenditure over the coming years. This focus on growth in receipts and at the same time a restrained approach to expenditures is nothing new. It's been with us for a number of years now. What has changed, however, is a greater increase in the spending on infrastructure and education, and in addition, a preservation of the funding that is necessary for the health sector. This is particularly evident in the increase in the Medicare levy to fund the NDIS scheme, which the government has been a long champion of. Education is a very key part of this budget, with a number of initiatives being introduced both for primary and secondary education, but also for the tertiary sector. Overall, the impact on the budget bottom line is actually positive because the efficiencies that are being sought in the tertiary sector are actually going to be larger than the additional increase in spending coming for the primary and secondary schooling system in the next 4 years. For primary and secondary schooling, the focus is on a shift to a needs-based funding model for independent and also state schools. $18.6 billion has been allotted to the sector over the coming decade, but only $1.8 billion of that funding will come through in the next 4 years, with most of this expenditure being backdated into the later half of the decade. This shift in funding towards a more needs-based system and therefore an increase in the amount of funds allocated to the public system will arguably provide greater education benefits in the longer term by providing those assets across a broader sweep of the population. It obviously is a key sort of element of the government's intentions that will therefore provide greater growth opportunities for the economy going forward, whether it be in the next 5 years or indeed the next 10 or 20 years. Now, offsetting this increase in funding for the primary and secondary sector, there are a number of efficiencies that are being sought in the tertiary sector. Here they fall into 3 key categories. There will be an increase in the fees that are paid for courses across universities by about 7.5% over the next 4 years. There will also be a reduction in the income threshold at which workers start to pay back their student loans after they actually finish that course. That will be reduced from $52,000 down to $42,000. Obviously, that will mean that people start to pay back their loans quicker, which will provide a reduction in the liability that is on the government's balance sheet. Finally, the government has an expectation that universities will be able to improve their efficiency and make better use of the funding they receive, both from the government and also from the student fees that they receive as they provide courses. Complementing the productivity improvement, which is expected to come from the increase in education spending, is an increase in efficiency that is expected to come from an increase in infrastructure spending. Now, the focus on infrastructure is not particularly new in this budget. It has really been with us since about 2012 or 2013. Over that time period, and including the additional measures that have been announced in this budget, it is expected the government will spend about $70 billion on infrastructure by about 2021. In addition to the spending until 2021, they're also looking to provide a continued pipeline of funding for additional projects well into the 2020s. And they're looking to actually increase so the available funding for projects out to 2026 to about $75 billion. In terms of key projects, there are really 2 that are worth particular focus. The first is the second airport for Sydney, with Badgerys Creek now firmly on the agenda and set for construction come 2018. And also the announcement that we'll see the start of a Melbourne to Brisbane rail link for freight, which again will likely start about 2018. Both of these projects will continue on well into the 2020s to likely to about 2026. And in doing so, they'll provide a continued flow of infrastructure projects and activity, which will support the economy and also the jobs market. If we turn now to the health sector, there are a number of initiatives that have been announced in this budget, both on the spending side and also savings. We're starting off with one of the key headline measures, which is an increase in the Medicare levy by 0.5 percentage point from 2 to 2.5%. This will take place from 1 July 2019 and it has one particular focus, and that is the funding of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which has been a key benchmark policy of the government for a number of years now. Even though this will see an increase in tax paid by most Australians, it is arguably a very justified policy because it will provide significant support for a number of vulnerable Australians for decades to come. Other health-related initiatives in this budget include a search for efficiency with regards to the pharmaceutical benefit scheme through the use of generic drugs. And in addition to that, they're looking to try and, reduce the pressure that's being put on GPs and other specialists who have seen a freezing of the payments being made to them for providing services to consumers for a number of years. This will be rolled back over the next couple of years through to 2019 and allow, less pressure being put on the costs associated with that industry, and therefore a reduced likelihood of those costs being imposed on households as they seek those services. Turning then to housing affordability, which was expected to be a key policy area for this budget, and indeed was certainly the case as it was released. There are a number of initiatives that have been announced here, both on the taxation side and also on seeking to try and improve supply. We'll start with the supply. Here we see a number of measures, the first being the sale of defence land, which is currently owned by the government to provide greater housing. The focus as a first instance is being Melbourne, but there is a willingness on the part of the government to provide an increase in Commonwealth land to provide an increase in supply, should that be seen as being appropriate going forward. In addition to that, there's also a number of changes being made to try and fast-track development through the reduction in blockages that come with providing key infrastructure to new housing. So in particular, water, power, all those kind of key essential items that are needed to provide services to households as they are built. On the taxation front, would-be first home buyers will now be able to save for a deposit through making additional contributions to their super. They can do so up to $15,000 per annum and to a lifetime cap of $30,000. Basically, come sort of a few years later when they have accrued that $30,000, they'll be able to withdraw that from their superannuation plus the income that has been earned on that additional savings, and then use that for a deposit on a house. So by taking advantage of this new policy initiative, would-be first home buyers will be able to reduce their taxation, save for a deposit sooner, and therefore hopefully more easily enter the housing market. To also increase the supply of existing housing, there is also a further sort of taxation measure provided to would-be downsizers, which will look to allow them to add up to $300,000 from the proceeds of a sale of their home to their superannuation. This is in addition to their non-concessional contributions cap, which has been announced in the previous budgets and made law in the time since. As a final point, there is also a greater number of restrictions being imposed on foreign buyers, both in terms of trying to get them to provide the houses that they own for rental supply, and also in terms of the taxation arrangements when they do sell properties as well. Finally, turning to taxation for corporates, what we have seen in this budget is a confirmation of the recently legislated cut in the tax rate for corporates who have a turnover less than 50 million. They will, over the next 3 years, see their tax rate reduced from 30% down to 27.5%. In addition to that, there is a continued belief from the government's perspective that they would like to see the corporate tax rate reduced to 25% by about 2027. However, there is no current expectation that this will be put before Parliament to actually see this transpire in the next couple of years. The big announcement, however, with regards to corporate taxation in this budget was the announcement of the major bank levy. Those with liabilities greater than $100 billion. They will now be asked to pay an additional levy in terms of taxation, which will go towards providing the services that are being rendered to the general population. It is expected by the government that this will provide a further $1.5 billion per annum over the foreseeable future, adding obviously a significant amount of receipts to the government's taxation. In order to assess the implications of this budget for the broader economy, we really need to consider the assumptions that have been made by Treasury. They have to make assumptions with regards to commodity prices and also the expectations around growth in the economy and also in wages. Starting with commodity prices, they are looking for an iron ore price in particular about $55 a tonne from early next year, and that is justifiable, albeit we would argue that there are some downside risks to that, particularly as we move through 2018. The implication there is that we are potentially likely to see weaker national incomes than the Treasury would expect, which would put downward weight on the deficit. With regards to the non-mining economy, there are also some potential downside risks. Treasury expect growth to firm towards trend come next year, and then to above trend in the 3 out years of these forecasts. Those forecasts are a bit above our own forecasts, and again we would argue that the downside risks there are quite clear. That has implications to the wages and the labour market as well, which is really what dictates the total receipts that the government earns through its taxation of households, but also of ordinary spending on the corporate side as well. So overall, there is a very clear sort of potential for downside risk to come through and to lead to larger deficits over the coming years than has been expected by the government in this budget. For our view on the RBA, the 2017 budget has no material implications. It is likely that the RBA will remain on hold through 2017 and 2018. And indeed, given the downside risk we do see to the Treasury's forecast, there could be a further need to actually think about further policy accommodation. What will be critical to the outlook is obviously commodity prices and how that impacts incomes, but also what happens to the labour market. And that's going to be a particular focus of ours as we move forward through 2017 and into 2018.